talking to Bob Kinkel, Hamilton alum, sitting in the Hamilton College Jazz Archive. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure. Good to see you.
I've been watching some videos of the Trans-Siberian Orchestra.
Okay.
And, it makes me wonder how you can still hear me, for one thing, and why you don't have like some battle scars or whatever.
Yeah, no burns, no nothing. Actually, when we play live, most of us have in-ears, which are basically, they take a mold of your ear, and it's like having earplugs in that are also headphones. So
Yeah.
you can be up there and listen pretty much as quiet as you want, and just sitting there and hear a nice stereo mix of the band. So it's not very loud for me, and all the pyro and stuff going off doesn't really make that much noise. So.
Boy, it sure does look like it.
Oh yeah, it's powerful. It's a powerful effect, and the front of house PA system, puts out a big oomph. It's
Right.
Try to make it not too loud. You try to keep it so it's not much louder than like a movie presentation, because we don't want people to have hearing damage and all that. So it was very carefully planned that way.
Okay.
So it sounds big, full, has an impact. You feel it in your chest, but it doesn't hurt anybody.
I'm
So.
glad you guys are aware of that.
Oh, very,
'Cause
very.
I'm sure you have a mixed age audience too. Parents want to be able to bring, their families and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, a lot do. There was, often you see like 3 generations out there.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of grandparents are rockers. If you figure out
Yeah.
let's see, Woodstock was in 1968, and add another 44 years to that, so most rockers from that era are in their 60s
Right.
and 70s. So
I've noticed that because
so
sometimes I play gigs at retirement homes, and people really perk up when you start to play some rhythm and blues and some rock and roll.
Oh, yeah.
It took me a while to get used to that, because it used to be Glenn Miller that would get them.
yeah.
But that whole
Yeah, now their youth is that the Stones and the Who and all that stuff. So, it's I remember listening to the radio when I was growing up, and there was always be big band on the old people station. Now it's old rock, but it's also great. The kids today listen to the same music a lot. There's a ton of new stuff, but just because of the accessibility of recording and the way that's all worked, you have really good access to the music your parents listen to, so you can pick and choose what you hear, and it's so easy to carry around 20 days of music on a little iPod or whatever. So
Well, if you meet someone at a party or whatever, someone that doesn't know you, and they ask you, what do you do? Do you have a short answer for them?
what do I do? I just say like I'm a music producer, or it depends on the party, because sometimes you just want to have fun at the party.
Yeah.
But I'll say musician, producer, and I'll say like one of my most recent successful projects is the Trans-Siberian Orchestra, which is I was one of the creators of that, with Paul O'Neill and John Oliva were the main people, with Paul kind of spearheading the project.
Right. Did you have those? It's sometimes hard to look back at the time when you might have thought your career was going to be, but when you were at Hamilton, you were a music major.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have thoughts about, okay, post-Hamilton, what am I going to do in music?
I kind of knew by the end that I wanted to be going into the recording aspect, the production aspect of music. I had, on campus, I had the campus band, for my senior year called Rowe. And we were playing all the house parties and doing that. And we had started to write some original stuff. And I had actually stayed up here a year after graduating. I graduated in '79, so I stayed up one further year. We were trying to see if we could keep the band together and do something with it. And that kind of didn't work out too well. But I ended up I was working for the physics department, putting all the labs together for them, and I was the organist in the chapel. So that kind of kept me busy. and just doing music, reading everything about it, and ended up, I kind of had that goal in mind, and I was still a little naive of what you really needed to like be a recording engineer or something. Like I figured you had to have an electrical engineering degree and all that stuff. And I remember near the earlier in the spring of 1980, I was working with Jim Ring and Phil Pearl and Peter Millay in the physics department. And Jim Ring asked me, he goes, "So what are you doing next year?" And I'm going, "Well, I'm not really sure." And I said, "You want to go to Columbia?" Because I guess they have a 4-2 program with Hamilton and Columbia. So I put in an application, and they called me up and said, "Oh, we'd love to have you," and was awarded a full fellowship for studying solid-state physics at Columbia. So
Solid-state physics?
Solid-state physics deals with it's in the material science aspect of that. So I went down and did that, and about halfway through the program, decided really didn't like it, and I wanted to get into music. So,
well, at the time there was, I don't think there was much of a opportunity to go and study how to be a recording engineer. Now you have Full Sail Recording School, and most music schools have programs for that. Was apprenticeship like something that you aspired to?
Yeah, that was really the only way to do it, and the bigger studios had a system in place for training people. And at the time it was Record Plant and Power Station were the two biggest studios in New York. They were cranking out all the hits that you'd be hearing at the time. And I had met now a good friend of mine, Jim Ball, through like a convoluted thing, which everybody's contacts always come through some kind of convoluted thing. Was Andy Burns, who grew up in Clinton, was good friends with Jim Ball, who grew up in Clinton, and Andy was my second cousin's roommate who went to Hamilton, and I met them at a party in New York, and Jim was working at Record Plant, and so he introduced me to the studio manager at the time, and so I went in, met them, gave them my resume, and they said, "Oh, we don't have anything," and I said, "I'll work for free," and then I basically came back every 2 weeks for 6 months, saying, "Hey, what's going on? How you doing? I'll work for free." And they started to get to know me. I started getting to know people around there. And then eventually, I think they had an intern from some other school there like 3 days a week. So I just went and said, "Oh, what about the other two? I work those days." And they go, "Okay." I guess persistence paid off. So I started doing that. And then once I was in there, I worked for free for a few months. I was like helping the carpenter, move walls, paint. I work in the maintenance shop. I remember I made thousands of mic cables because they had 2 recording trucks and they were redoing all their cables for those. And, I'd follow the maintenance guys around. I would sit with the assistant engineers when they would do their practice sessions. So I learned the rooms and, I was there like 80 hours a week just working.
How did you pay your rent?
Well, I was actually luckily living with at my girlfriend's mom's house in Brooklyn Heights and just paid her like minimal rent. But I also had I took out a student loan right before I left to kind of get me through the gap, and which I've totally paid back. Because I always consider like internships and working for super low amounts of money is basically you're either going to school for free or you're getting paid something to go to school. I can think of it as a stipend because so many people, they will go to a Full Sail or one of these places and they get out, expect to be making money, but it doesn't matter what you do, you're still at the bottom when you come out, and you might be working for free or you might be making, $150 a week travel money and stuff like that. There's just not a lot of money at the beginning. So you have to look at it as I'm going to school more. I'm continuing that. So that's always been my way of justifying it.
So was it can I imagine it was a big deal the first time you got to like set up microphones or something for some band and be in the midst of it?
Yeah, as I said, I was the way Record Plant work is the assistant engineers basically were up on top. You had to be almost as good as an engineer to be able to be an assistant at Record Plant. Actually, can we take one second? I just need to blow my nose.
Sure.
Where were we?
We were talking about sort of that entrance into the
booth. Yeah, you're asking I mean, it was exciting at Record Plant from the day I walked in there, because it, like, there were 4 studios plus 2 remote trucks at Record Plant. So they were always doing something with the top people. Like, if you walked in the door on the ground floor, to the left was Studio B, and the day I started, Cyndi Lauper was doing her debut record in Studio B. Jay Giles' band was up in the mix room, doing the Freeze Frame album, which was like their multi-platinum hit. Like Willie Nile was in another room. You'd have Joan Jett. You'd have, like, everybody would be there, and it was just, everybody's just walking around, hanging out on the phone. So it's like, all of a sudden you're just in the midst of it. And again, they had a really nice training program. So wasn't specifically called a training program, but they wanted their people to be tops notch. So an assistant engineer had to know the room inside and out, every single patch point. You had to memorize every patch point, every knob, what that did, how every piece of outboard worked. Everything in the studio. As an assistant, you had to know how to do that. And the assistants would punch in, which, for recording. The engineer didn't do that. The assistants at Record Plant would do all the punches. So it was just like really learning from the top people. And as I said, I was like helping the assistants do that. So I'd learn the rooms, They said, you got to memorize the patch bay. Memorize the patch bays in all 4 rooms, how everything was patched around there. And plus I was going around with the maintenance guys, just tag along and, watched them align a tape machine. And like by the next day I could do it because I have so much a technical background. The tech stuff was cake for me. So
that was a help, the stuff you did here. And
yeah, it was very much. I did a lot of electronic music work here. They used to have a 4-track Scully and a 2-track Revox and one of the big ARP modular synthesizers, and I had a Mini Moog that I bought my senior year in high school. So I knew analog synthesis inside and out. And Hugh Hartwell, who was the teacher for my freshman year when I took the electronic music course, he goes, if you learn how to edit tape, you can always get a job in a recording studio. And I got really, really good at editing here. And so there I was so good at editing, the producer and the engineer would walk off and they'd leave me with all the master mixes of the tapes and say, cut the other record, we'll be back.
Wow.
Or they'll say, because in those days, it was before they had automated mixes, so every mix would be a performance, and you would like mix the first part, second part, and then you kind of listen back and you take the best parts of the mixes and cut them together to make your final mix of the song. So they would leave me that, and they wouldn't even tell me where, just say, cut it together.
No kidding.
So I got to do a lot of that, and backtracking a little. I've been working for free, learning all the stuff from the assistants and people there, and all of a sudden I get when I walked in one day, they go, Roy wants to work with you. And Roy Sakala was the owner of Record Plant. He was John Lennon's engineer. He goes, way, way back. He's just like amazing, amazing engineer. And so he pulled me in. He always had a band that he was working with, kind of, pet project, and also for training people. And so he brought me into a session, and he's just a very low-key guy. And he will basically pretend he doesn't know things. He will like set up a feedback loop on the console that's one button away from like blowing your head off if you press the wrong button. And he was like, hi, I want to record a vocal on track 22. I push this button, right? And that would be the button of death. And if you didn't go, no, and you'd have like 2 seconds to say, no, not that. That'll cause a feedback loop. And if you didn't, he would just push it and just sit there and go, oh, that's nice. So you have like 120 dB of feedback coming at you.
Was that his way of like testing you to see
what you were
doing?
So and the next day I was hired because I didn't let him do that.
Oh, that is so cool. I recall I did some studio work and never. I don't think I ever spliced any tape, but the first time I ever saw tape spliced, I thought it was the damnedest thing. You can cut that and put this piece in, and you can't tell.
Mm-hmm. If you do it right.
If you do it right.
Yeah.
Were you using 2-inch machines?
Yeah, they were 2-inch machines. They would lock up. They had a way of synchronizing multiple 24 tracks. So
Wow.
Most of the mixes by the time I was there started being 48 track, or actually 46 track, because you had a time code to lock them up together.
Did you ever think at that time, I'm not sure how to phrase this, but did you ever experience better recordings that had fewer tracks because you had to make better decisions?
It's all about kind of decisions. I was just been teaching class topics in music, and part of it we went back through a lot of recording history and how things work. Like in Motown days, almost all those recordings are 3-track, where they would pre-mix to 1 track of a machine, and then they would do a session and record like brass on another, winds on another, and then they would take those 3 tracks and bounce it with like a live recording of strings and maybe background vocals, and then they would mix that to another machine and record the lead vocals, and then have your final thing together. So all the pre-mix stages had to be, that was it. Your decision was made, it was done. And as the number of tracks started increasing, basically all it did was postpone when the decisions and the commitments were made. And so in the class, I just showed them like how a 4-track of the Beatles, Sgt. Pepper's was 4-track, Led Zeppelin, like Whole Lotta Love was an 8-track. Then you get to Bohemian Rhapsody was 24-track, and where you have things, you use like 1 track for many different things, and then you bring it up to different channels on a mixing console. And again, everything was by hand, punching things in and out, moving things around, twisting knobs, and that was how you did your mix. And then automation started showing up, mid-'80s. It was kind of usable automation. So then you could listen to a mix and it would play back exactly the same the next time because all the faders were being moved for you. And eventually, that let you, get the perfectionist guy in there a little more. So things became less of performances and more of a repeatable thing. And then now it's down to mixing in the box. A lot of people do where it's instantly recallable. Your mix is right there, and you can say, I couldn't hear, the 3rd word in the 2nd line of the 3rd verse, and you just go bink, and that's all you have to do, and reprint your mix, and you're done.
Is it good? Is it a good thing?
It can be. It's all how my view of technology and the way it's gotten so much easier to do it in all forms, like graphic design, art, music recording. It's really easy to get to high mediocrity. And unfortunately, that is like where a lot of people stay, and it's very rare. People are popping up above that with any kind of design. It's like I'm happy. Like a lot of the top architectural schools are making everybody do stuff by hand again before they'll let them take that whatever design they did by hand and put it into CAD programs. So it's more using it as a tool instead of the creative crutch, because it's so easy to. Yeah, it's easy to get high mediocrity.
That's going to be my, I'm going to quote you on that. That's a great way to put it. So, any particular memorable encounters with some of the musicians, the bands that your tenure there? After I was there for about a year, I was lucky to go on tour with The Who. We did, it was their first final tour in 1982. Well, it said Who final tour. I still have like all the swag from that. But I was the tape op. Basically, I was, Glyn John's like using these huge Altec speakers for his big, so I had to figure out a way to fit those into the big truck. It was they called it Black Pete. It was a big Peterbilt truck, and beautiful truck with an API console and just decked out hardwood and stuff. Just a gorgeous looking truck. But I had to figure out a way to get these monitors in there in front. So I built this thing out of wood and put it together and knew how to set it up so it would the speakers would sit there kind of on shelves and fit. So because I put that together, I got to go and be the tape op. Plus, they knew I knew all the tech stuff and could do that. So that was great. So I got to hang in the truck with Glyn Johns, and he would get the mix up and tell stories, and so that was like my first. Were they recording every live concert?
They're recording all their stadium shows,
and
a couple of the smaller ones, but it was basically just going around to stadiums all over the country, and I got to fly around, which was great. Yeah. Because I didn't know how to drive the truck. Sometimes that's an advantage. Yeah, it's like.
That sounds like a cool experience.
Yeah, that was wonderful. And then, working with a live truck, I got to work with a lot of different people. We worked with Genesis, like anybody who was popular during the 80s, we recorded live. There were these live shows like King Biscuit Flower Hour and things like that, which would be live recordings of the bands, and Record Plant would do most of them. So we were out there all the time.
Were your friends in the business jealous of what you were doing?
I don't know. My friends became, people I was working with there, so not really.
Okay.
Because everybody's working with somebody at
Right.
that point. Some of them were jealous that had been there for a while because we did a broadcast from Toronto for The Who. At the end of the tour, it was this huge. And in those days, there wasn't pay-per-view, there wasn't cable TV really, except for a better way to get your antenna. But so all the big events were kind of projected live in clubs for like the big concerts and things like that. So it would be like a live in theaters, clubs, and all that. And so we were doing that, and I got a full screen credit for the thing as being a tape op. So they were kind of.
Well, it just occurred to me that about the time you stayed your extra year here at Hampton, you said that was 1980.
Yeah, 79, 80.
At that same time, I was in a progressive rock band in this area. And people, I think most of us had this concept of, we want to make it big, whatever that meant. We weren't sure what it meant, but it certainly meant not playing it just in Central New York. Might mean going.
Mm-hmm.
But then, of course, we were all trying to score a record deal.
Right.
And whatever, we probably weren't even sure what that meant, except that we would have a record. And it seems like most musicians are always trying to get to the next level. And when I hear your story, you went to a next level, but maybe it wasn't what you thought it would be, but it ended up.
Yeah, you just keep following the way you go. And I mean, I went from working at Record Plant and assisting on, records. I worked with Jack Douglas on an Aerosmith record. I got to work with Dave Thoner with Don Was. Like one of their first records was Not Was. And so I got to work on the mix with that and just see how that's done. And, everybody's sitting there on the console for the mix, just moving faders, doing that. So I learned a lot from a lot of different people who are all at the top of their game. As I mentioned Roy Cicala before, just learning their techniques, how they do that, how you record a vocal, So I learned all that, and then I also could read music. I was also a player. They had some really nice Steinways in all the rooms, so downtime or whatever, I just sit there, break out Beethoven, play, or etudes or whatever. So I was playing a lot, keeping my chops up. I was still into synthesis. I actually started renting keyboards within the thing. I had a Rhodes and bought a Prophet 5 and all that, so I'd rent it to sessions. They were nice enough to let me do that, so I was kind of entrepreneurial there. Mm-hmm. And I started playing out in local bands and stuff. Like in New York, you're never in one band. You're always in like about 5 different ones, and everybody's playing at different times. Just the way it worked. So got a lot of experience doing that, and I just like one day I was like, I think it was a jingle session or something, and the guy would like reprogram his sound in between each section because it had to go from one sound to another sound. So he would like program back and forth, and I said, they had a score there, and I said, I can just punch around that, just keep the one sound and and play it. I'll punch into those sections, and then change the sound, punch into the other, which didn't endear me to him because I think he was going for some overtime on the session.
Oh, yeah.
But and then there are other times where working with some band and like he's trying to play a keyboard part, and it's like 4 hours later, I realized like I could have had this done in 10 minutes, and so I started saying, well, maybe I should start playing on sessions. And I had met Charlie Morrow was one of the clients at Record Plant, and he had an event business, and he also did jingles. He was kind of on the fringe of the jingle industry, and we were just one day we were just talking about synthesis and the future of, how that's going and that in computer music and where that is all going to. And he said, "Oh, I've got this jingle project. You want to work on it with me?" And it was like kind of just doing a video version of the sounder for 1010 Wins. But, it was fun. And then he said, "Oh, I got this other thing." It was his agency had sent out a thing to all the music houses. So it was a competition among every single music house that was in New York or probably the country. It was for hefty trash bags. And basically they just gave lyrics. It was just hefty, 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 wimpy, wimpy, wimpy. And that was all it said on it.
Oh my God.
And Charlie had this one idea, and I worked with him on that, and we recorded this thing in his 8-track studio, and we won. That was it. And it was like, so all of a sudden I started making money with SAG residuals, because it was our voices going hefty, hefty, hefty.
Okay.
And so we're both getting double solo scale because we double tracked ourselves, and it was like, I was happy. I made like $400, and then all of a sudden all the residual checks started coming in, and like all of a sudden, this thing ran for 5 years, and it turned into hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it was like, wow, I won the lottery. So that was great. It kind of allowed me to, feed my equipment habit and things like that. So,
That's so interesting. I mean, you think about guys like, was it Neil Hefti who wrote Batman, the Batman theme?
Yeah.
And, probably the quickest thing he ever wrote, and he probably made more money off that than the great basic charts and all that stuff. And you guys were probably laughing when you were doing this hefty.
Oh yeah, we had a great time.
Yeah.
Charlie was shorter than me, so to do that I had him stand on a chair so he'd be like the same height on the mic, and we slowed down the tape machine for him to do the wimpies and sped it back up, and I knew all the recording tricks, I knew all the production stuff, plus I knew the music, so it worked really well. Like I wasn't the best player in the world, I wasn't the best engineer, but I did everything really, really well, so I could just go in and take care of any situation.
Did you have to learn to deal with, the clients who wanted something from the music, but they couldn't really tell you what it was?
Yeah, you would deal with that. It's you kind of figure out, like if you're working with a picture, you kind of figure out what works, and a lot of times they'll give you like reference things, which is they'll like sort of something like kind of like this piece of music, something that's they'll give you an idea sometimes of what they're looking for, and sometimes you'll give them something totally different that they hadn't thought of, and they go, oh whoa, that's even better, so and
What about hiring other session players? Was that part of what you did?
A little bit, not as much. I would like, if it's something I was doing with Charlie or something I was more involved in production on, you need a guitar part, you would call in like Elliot Randall or someone to come in. It was fun. I did like a lot of just showing up as a keyboard player to sessions too, and you never knew if we'd be on the session. So like Steve Gadd would be there. You have, and just, how you doing? Good. Okay. See you later. I gotta go do some dog food thing in 10 minutes, and so there was a lot of the working musician stuff there. So you would cross paths with a lot of the again heroes that you.
As a session player, you rarely knew what you were going to be called on to play music-wise. Is that correct?
That's very correct. And usually the people hiring you, the contractors, would know what you do. So I was like, a synthesizer specialist, but I also played piano a bit. So depending on what it was, I'd get called for whatever it is. I used to have, like Prophet 5, a DX7, a few modules and stuff all built into racks. And they'd have these people that would move your equipment for you called cartage people. That it was great. They would come to my studio, break it all down. I rewired all my stuff so everything was on multi-pin connectors, and they'd take it down, pack it up, take it to the studio for me, set it all up. So basically I walked in and it's all ready to go, everything, and just go, play whatever they need, and then just call them, I'm done, pack it up and take it over to the next session.
Let me see how you would have dealt with the situation. I had a session once where a guy had me play one note on the sax. He wanted one note. And I did it right the first time. In other words, this whole thing might have taken 15 minutes. Now, when someone asked if you had done something like that, said, well, what's your charge for this? Do you charge them hardly anything because you did it in 50 minutes, or do you charge them more because you just saved them studio time?
Well, if it's in the commercial world and what I was doing, it all falls under the union rules. So it was by the hour.
Okay.
So I would show up and they go, what we need here is a whoosh, and I would just go whoosh. And being a keyboard player, multi keyboards and stuff, you'd always get double scale. So I got double scale for going in and playing a whoosh, or sometimes you would be there for hours and hours. But they set up the scale system just for those things. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So you're not in a position, around here, the union wasn't involved in any of that, so you wouldn't be in that kind of position where the guy paying the bill might think, well, you weren't here very long.
You just played a note, but then you also, you have to get there. The majority of your time for, doing a local session, you have to get there, you gotta, you have to be warmed up, you have to be ready to play anything. And that's what they're paying you for. They're not paying you for your note. It's what was the old, was it a Saturday Night Live skit where they were doing the Mr. Rogers takeoff with the bass player?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and he's going, yeah, I'm just thinking about how much I get paid per note. It doesn't work like that. So, they're paying you for your expertise, and whatever you're doing, you're playing whatever part they need. So.
You still do this?
No.
Much?
No, not very much. Like I'll go, I play on stuff that I'm producing or friends of mine are producing. I'll go in and play piano parts or orchestrate things. I still record. I have a studio in Long Island City, Queens, and it's part of another big complex that I also have a part interest in. And so we have huge 72 input SSL board with big recording room, and then I've got another whole Pro Tool system in the back that's all in the digital world, and it's racks of guitars and just a whole credenza full of synthesizer modules and all the latest toys. And
you have to, it's important that you like and enjoy technology, isn't it? Is that an understatement?
The way I particularly work, yes, but I have a lot of friends of mine who are just, they understand it enough to be able to converse with the engineers and stuff and tell them what they want, because there's people who know the tech stuff, and part of their job is to translate, what musicians have in mind into, geek talk, tech talk to make it work. So if you're not a tech guy and something sounds dull, you just say, that sounds a little dull, and then the engineers are, I got to bring up the top end, stuff like that. You don't need to talk to them in technical terms. You can use words like punchy and punchy, dull, make it more exciting. You can say things like that. So,
okay.
But I happen to do all of it, so I don't.
Right. Well, the whole thing with the Trans-Siberian Orchestra had this sort of path from a heavy metal band into this Christmas-oriented, I guess it's a seasonal. Has it become seasonal? Is it more than that?
It started off seasonal, but it's become kind of a year-round thing. That, again, I was doing session work, and I had left Record Plant, but all my connections I'd made there were still there. There's Paul O'Neill, who's the main guy in TSO, was doing his first record with a band called Sabotage, which is the metal band that TSO kind of spun off of. The same creative core when formed Trans-Siberian Orchestra. And this was in the mid-'80s. They were doing Hall of the Mountain King. And I got a call from my friend Jim, who's the guy who had introduced me to Record Plant to begin with, saying, I'm with this guy, he wants to do a orchestra kind of thing, and can you do that with your sample stuff? Can you do a whole orchestral part? And I go, yeah, no problem. And so I brought in my emulator too, with all my stuff, brought in, and they were doing Hall of the Mountain King, Grieg. So it's and there was this piece they were doing where it was a kind of war between the rock band and the orchestra. So, basically played every single part one at a time of the orchestra, but it was a more in-your-face kind of sound because it was a keyboard thing. But it also had a realism to it because, if there's, 5 string lines, I'd play it with 5 different sounds and layer it all together so, you could have done it with people, but I was there and I just did it, and it was a way of making it really tight sounding. And so that was the first time I worked, and I ended up playing a bunch of stuff on the rest of the record, and then started calling me back for any record he did. I would come in and play keyboards on. And in the early 90s, we started writing together, because he'd always hear me noodling and go, oh, it's got some good stuff. So
Like Duke Ellington. Used to listen to his players noodle,
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, he would listen to his people warm up, and he'd go, I think I like that. Da-da-da-da-da-da. Well, I think I'll write a song.
Yeah, so anyway, we started writing. We wrote a musical called Romanoff When Kings Must Whisper and a couple other things. And in the meantime, then Paul had this idea for doing something with Carol of the Bells. And he was going to kind of had a guitar intro for God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen. So and we worked on that together for a while, and then Christmas Eve Sarajevo, 1224, came out of that. We wrote some original music too, and combined it with the well-known carols and created that piece. And then Al Petrelli added some guitar stuff, and that all of a sudden became a hit. The first time that was played, it was originally on a Sabotage record called Dead Winter Dead, which is about the conflict in Bosnia. And, the rest of it is like real headbanging metal, but this one thing, there's a guy called Mason Dixon down in Tampa, and the band Sabotage was from Tampa, and he saw this little sampler CD of Sabotage, and he goes, oh, I know these guys, and he listened to it and just loved that track, Christmas Eve Sarajevo, so he put it on the air, and the lights lit up. Everybody called and go, what the hell is that? We love it. And from that, he called his friend Scott Shannon in New York City, he's the program director and main DJ for WPLJ, which was at the time the absolute largest radio listening audience. And we heard that he had gotten it and was going to play it in the next 3 days or so. So I got up every morning at 6 when their show started and put a cassette in the recorder and just kept flipping it, for 3 days. And finally, it came on. He started talking about it. There was like a story. Paul writes these amazing stories and he writes all the lyrics and co-writes all the music. He's an amazingly creative guy. But anyway, they read the whole story he wrote about it, which was about a cello player in the square in Sarajevo that would go in and play cello amidst the rubble, just to show man is alive, we're still human. And in Christmas time, you play Christmas carols. So the song starts out with a cello solo playing God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen over a guitar ostinato. And anyway, so he read the whole story, it was like boy, girl on each side, and hear the music and come together, and it's just like part of the healing process for peace. But he read the whole thing, and then they played the song, and then he started talking about it. So he got like 10 minutes of airtime on the song, and then, of course, the phones lit up there too, so they started playing it regularly. And it spread to Cleveland that year, and then the next year, we made Trans-Siberian Orchestra, the label said, can you do like a whole record of this stuff? So.
Yeah. And your first performance of this music occurred when?
There was one quick performance that we did down in Tampa for it was called the world's biggest office party.
Oh.
But that was as Sabotage. We played Christmas Eve Sarajevo for the first time. And then we didn't, we also would play live on the radio. The PLJ has their pet charity is at Children's Hospital, and I'm spacing on the name of it. I can't remember, but and every year they have, live music with a lot of top acts, and they asked us to do that. So we were there, ridiculously early in the morning playing, and we do appearances on Rosie O'Donnell or Conan O'Brien, a few TV shows, Good Morning Americas, that kind of thing. And then the first tour was in 1999. We just did a quick. It was a 7-show tour. It was supposed to be 4. We had no idea if anyone wanted to hear us or not live. And we put the first show on sale in Cleveland. And just the Bill Lewis, who's the program director and DJ there, was just a huge supporter. He was the one pushing us really to tour. That first show went on sale. Cleveland sold out in an hour. So we put 2 more shows on sale in Cleveland, and they both boom went out. So instead of a 4-show tour, it was a 5-show tour. It was a 7-show tour, where we just did New York, Philly, 3 in Cleveland, going there and back, and switching venues in the middle of the. We had to go play one venue one night, move everything to another one, play in that venue, and we did Detroit and Chicago.
Did the orchestra get larger and the tech thing get larger every year?
Every year we tended to add a truck worth of production. So the very first tour was 2 tour buses, 1 for the band, 1 for the crew, and 1 truck. And now they're up to 6 tour buses for the crew, 3 for the band, and 19 semis.
Good Lord. And there's East and West Coast.
And there's an East and West Coast, so you multiply that by 2. So you're talking an army of people. There's about 130 people, including drivers, that are with us. And then you figure you go to the local arena, they have all the local, riggers, pushers, all the people that help, all the stage hands. Mm-hmm. And then you have your concessions people and your people selling merchandise, your parking, all that stuff. So like all of a sudden there's like a huge industry that's built up around what we're doing. So it's just like.
Do you have someone who doesn't perform to keep all this together? Like you have an office?
There's a management office, night cancel management. There's a tour manager, Elliot Salzman. There's a lighting designer, Brian Hartley. There's all these people. We have Dave Whitman mixes the front of house, the live sound. He's also the engineer on all the records. So live it sounds like the record. And for the other coast, he's trained the guy to do the mixing. So it's it's a huge collaborative effort to put up a show like that. And I toured from '99 through, what was my last tour? Through 2009, so 11 years of touring.
Was it mostly November, December thing?
All of November, December. You can't really play before Halloween,
right,
and you
right.
can't really do it after New Year's. So it was basically putting together a major tour that like most bands would like rehearse for a couple months to go out with that much technology, and then they would tour for 1 or 2 years. But we had to compress all that, and we only had 2 months to do that, and then the whole next year everything would change, all the effects, the lighting trusses, everything would move. So it was like just it's a huge undertaking. So
what was the biggest reason you stopped touring?
just kind of burning out, missing seeing my kids, it's hard.
Yeah.
And the tour was getting grueling, and I never expected to be really playing live on arena stages. I was expecting to be the guy, producing and doing that stuff. But the way it worked out, I was just out there. So I was I was 42 years old before I was on a big stage for the first time.
Isn't that interesting how that works out?
So up there, all of a sudden you oh wow, and you look at the video and you go. You think you're moving, you look at the video and go, oh, wow, it looks like you're standing there. So then you have to move more and, kind of get the visual performance and make the excitement happen. So it's like that was a total learning process. But I wasn't, one of the guys who've been, what they call road dogs that have been out there forever doing stuff.
How old were your kids when you were doing that?
My daughter, when we started the touring, my son was 8, my daughter was 4.
Did they have any idea what you did? I mean...
They had an idea. They knew I did music. They didn't really care. Mm-hmm. Eliza, my ex, she would tell me, "Hey, Daddy's on TV," and they go, "Yeah, so who cares?" I remember my daughter coming to like the first concert and falling asleep. Or like I'll come backstage. There's like one song where I would get a break in the whole show. It's a 2.5 hour show, so I'm like standing up there playing the whole thing, and the keyboards are kind of like the keyboards and drums are kind of the solid rhythm section to keep it all together. It's not kind of a traditional thing where, so it's very rhythmic keyboard playing. So you're kind of holding things together, and I remember going backstage and like my son's sound asleep on the couch. So, yeah. they care. They didn't think it was cool until their friends thought it was cool, and then they go, oh, maybe Dad's all right.
I mean, if you said now that, if you told them about going on tour with The Who, etc., does that impress them?
No, because they've seen me at the high level, and the last, I don't know, 8 years or so, we've been having guests. So had Roger Daltrey on stage with me. We did, what did we do? Behind Blue Eyes, and so a few Who hits,
Wow.
and so we've had all the big rock stars have been around with that. So it kind of came full circle. I remember worked with Greg Lake from Emerson, Lake and Palmer. He was one of the first special guests we had, along with John Anderson from Yes. So like in 1 year, we did Roundabout Live from Yes, which had never really been done before, with all the vocals because we have 8 singers. So you can do da 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 da, with the little 3 blind mice thing. Yeah. So that's what it was. Actually, I was talking to John. He said, like, what was the idea? And he goes, I was just had 3 blind mice in my head. So because it da 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 da, kind of out of time. So that was like, he just wanted to get 3 blind mice in there. And Greg Lake, the last time I'd seen him was at Rich Stadium, outside of Buffalo, where I grew up. It was one of the big, they were doing Brain Salad Surgery Tour, which is in quad, and they're up there 20 feet in the air on the stage, so I was like, down in front, like looking up at him, and then the next time I see him, he's, I'm working with them and teaching them songs, and we're, figuring out how to, we did Carnival 9 live, so, he's up there, and great guy, just loves to play, so he's.
I was trying to figure out, watching some of the video of the TSO, there seems to be a lot of unison going on in a lot of the lines. Is that correct? Some of the guitar things are doubled with the violins and all that?
Double the lead guitar and the violins double a lot, and sometimes the keyboards are in there too, doubling.
Yeah, and there's no music on stage, right? I mean, there's no music stands.
There's music stands for the string section because 7 of the string would be local players. We take one, the lead violin player, who also runs all over the place, and on stage. They get to rock out. They memorize everything, and they're also the conductor leader for the string section. So all the parts are written out. I made up all the scores and stuff for it, and they rehearse earlier in the day for the show, and just play through it, go over the tough spots, and and we have a contractor, Steve Trudell, out of Detroit, who actually contracts all the local strings for us throughout the country, and so he knows the people that'll look like they're rockers, won't mind things exploding behind them, because
they know what they're getting into.
Well, they do, but we still, it's gone everything from, I remember one time there's like shower of sparks that comes down in one part of the show. And it's what's known as cold flame. You can put your hand in it; it's not going to burn you. But it was hot enough that the back rail was like a little, it wasn't quite enough distance between the string risers and that, or it might have breeze blowing or something. So the sparks fell down and landed on the rosin rag for one of the cello players, and it just burst into flames. But this guy was totally cool. He's just like, he's playing along, stomping out the thing with his foot while he's playing. It was hysterical. And then we had another time where there was a viola player that, like, the first little ball of flame went off. She just, boom, stood up, left. Boom, gone. So you have the full range of, people as far as that goes. But, after a few years, we started getting the same people back all the time, and they knew what the show was, and they got into it. And
how the heck do you mic those instruments so that you can hear them and that they can hear themselves? I guess anything's possible now. But
well, now because it's easier with the lower stage volume, they have like a little monitor, and then there's what are we using? I forgot which mic we're using on them, but they're little clip-ons. They kind of go on the bridge.
Yeah.
And because they have to hear themselves, otherwise it's horrendous and out of tune, and a lot of it's doubled on keyboards. So if the string section's rocking, it's sounding good. They're really loud in the mix, and if they're not, they're at the appropriate level, shall we say. So
I I was blown away. I mean, I'd seen a little bit, but since I knew you were coming, I've been watching a little more. You know, everybody has the look, and to go with the whole shebang.
Mm-hmm.
Got every sense going.
Yeah, no, Paul is like really, visionary on a lot of that, and he's thinking up all the effects, anything he can, and then we, try to make it work. And you have to look. He wants everybody to look like rock stars up there and do it, and
yeah,
it comes across like that.
Mm-hmm. Do you ever try to? Are you a thinker ahead, as far as how am I going to be in the music business in 10 years? Can you do such a thing?
You try to figure out where you're going. You work on projects that may take 3 or 4 years to come to light. So and you're just constantly writing, and it's constantly changing too. You kind of go, oh, I want to try to get this to happen. It's like when with TSO starting, we were like kind of going a Broadway track or doing rock opera stuff, and then this one song hit that kind of took it another direction, and followed that for a while. And now we're coming back to trying to produce the original shows. Some of them might get released as TSO records, some may be produced differently. So the stuff comes around. It's not uncommon for something to be sitting around for 20 years before it makes it to Broadway or something like that. It's a long process, and you keep going, plugging away at it. And luckily Trans-Siberian's been very successful. We sold up over 7 million records now, and touring for over 1 million people a year. So luckily, I have a little, put away enough money to put the kids through college, and I can last for a few years. So I don't have to worry about being, because hand to mouth, because that is the biggest musician danger. Like most musicians, you're always just going for your next gig so you can have enough money to eat and do what you're doing. The ones that don't have steady job, Yeah. So I'm just very lucky that I've been able to support myself for, 30-something years in the music business.
I guess. What's your role with the group now?
Just doing a little writing, kind of on the outskirts right now, and we'll be working more. We're developing something called Rock Theater. We'll take, this year's the first year they're not doing Christmas Eve and Other Stories as the main show. They're doing Lost Christmas Eve, which was the 4th CD, the 3rd Christmas one. And also we toured Beethoven's Last Night, and just maybe moving that to a more theatrical setting called, Rock Theater is what we're going for. So there'll be, different productions coming out.
Is the idea of, when you say that you might record some of the stuff they've been doing the last couple of years, etc., will they come out on CD?
Yeah.
Okay.
CDs are still viable. I mean,
all right.
Especially, there's a lot of people that, don't deal with the internet, don't like it. They want a CD. They want the thing they can stick in their car. They don't want to deal with this little box.
Right.
But then on the other side, there's the kids that they don't even want to have the little box. They just want it to stream to them. So it's kind of going that way. Different parts of the world are still very CD oriented, and then there's places where it's just all internet and all downloadable music.
Right. What's your view on that?
I think it's going to go more and more downloadable, just the way it is with books and everything. It was 2 years ago that they crossed the halfway point between electronic books and paper. So it's the same thing. The digital download you see becoming a greater number, and numbers in general are way, way down for people actually that pay for it in any form, because it's so easy to steal it. And a lot of people, their only way they access music is YouTube. That's how most kids now, if they want to hear a song, they go to YouTube and look for it. So it's figuring out what the new model's going to be. Everything's in transition right now. So
that's for sure.
The person who figures it out will win.
I bet they're trying too.
Yeah, I mean, Apple was huge with the iTunes thing. They figured out how to make a ton of money for Apple, so, but at least they're paying something to the musicians, so, and the bands. It's a different world out there.
Yeah. I found this quote, someone talking about TSO, I think one of the three of you, fog it, light it, blow it up.
That's Paul.
That's Paul.
Yeah. Fog it, light it, blow it up. There's a lot of fog on stage. You know, ground fog through the whole show. We have, you know, smoke comes in for some things, which, I mean, you need smoke to be able to see the beams of light on the stage. If it's a clear, no smoke environment, you can't see the beams of light. You know, you have to have some particles for it to shine off of.
I hadn't thought of that really.
Yeah. So, you know, especially with lasers and things like that, because we have a lot of lasers in the show, and they're all making patterns and stuff. But if you can't see the beams, you know, it loses most of the effect. It's just this little thing drawing on the far wall. But if you have smoke throughout the whole thing, you know, you do a fan with laser beams, and it looks like a platform of light. Like if you're watching it from way up on the top of the arena, it almost looks like you could slide down this platform of light to the stage. So it's very, very cool looking stuff. But yeah, you need the fog and the lights, lighting effects. Very big on lights being in time with the music and being part of the music. So everything's moving in layers. And then blow it up is all the pyro and the flames and the switcher.
Has the fog over the years gotten easier to be in the midst of?
I never really liked it that much.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's part of the show. You got to do that. You know, in the really cold venues, the flames are great because it just warms you up. You get this thing. So, you know, it's all...
Bring those closer.
Yeah, and you know, everybody said, you know, what the lights are so amazing. What's it look like on stage? And I'm going, well, it looks like my keyboard is red, my keyboard is blue, or I can't see my keyboard. That's all the lights are for me. You know, so it's fun.
Have you noticed a difference in working with the side women people, working with schooled musicians and people who are mostly self-taught, how they absorb the music, how they memorize it, how they learn
it? Almost everybody out there is a combination. Like I am. Had piano lessons when I was a little kid, and then in high school I started teaching myself. You know, my music teacher would say, you know, I said I want to get better. He said, well, you know, try the Bach two-part invention. So I learned all those, and then you know, he gave me the well-tempered clavier. And then I remember Emerson, Lake and Palmer came out with pictures at an exhibition, and it'd probably been out for a while, but you know, it was a record club thing. You know, I think I bought Tarkus was their first record because it had the giant little armadillo arm thing. I thought, oh, that's a cool cover, and I just bought it because of the cover, and loved the music, and then bought all their other records. So I discovered pictures at an exhibition, and I brought it in. Michael Levy was the teacher. This was in the Williamsville School District, and
near Buffalo.
Near Buffalo, where I grew up, and so I brought this piece in, and he goes, you know, that's a piano piece. And I go, it is? You know, I had no clue. And he was really nice. He bought me the music, so I started learning that. And then, you know, I'd practice all the time. And, you know, my chops are really getting strong, you know, on my own. And then when I got up here, I found out you could take piano lessons. So I remember Albert Bowen was one of the adjunct people. He was like, lived down in Clinton. He was, you know, quasi-official person up here. And so I actually took piano from him for 1 year. And he was a student of Horowitz, and just learned a lot about classical technique and how to approach a piece. Learned, you know, a couple of Chopin etudes from him, and just learned a ton. And then had to take my keyboard requirement at Hamilton, you know, so I quickly passed out because I could play the scales, and you know, you had to play scales in every key and know your basics there. And that, you know, took a few weeks. And then I was working with Steve Best, who's still teaching.
Steve was here then?
Yeah, Steve. Yeah, Steve. I love Steve. He's great. But so then I went through all the open score reading and figured bass reading. So I think it was either 1 semester or 2 semesters I passed out of all that stuff, and I still had like 2 more years I had to take. So he said, do you want to learn how to play organ? So I started taking organ lessons instead of the basic keyboard. And that was great. I loved it. Started learning how to play with your feet, and like all the different fingering techniques for organ, which really came in handy for doing synthesizer work, because you know you're playing legato lines on the organ. You have to do a lot of finger substitutions to play legato, and you know, you get piano players playing, you know, multi keyboards. It's always, you know, that, or they put the sustain pedal on, and it just becomes a mush of hell. So I developed kind of my own technique for, because I even play piano with finger switches. So I don't use the sustain pedal, so it keep really solid and clean when I play a lot. So it's you know, it all was stuff I learned here that I kind of, you know, applied in my own way. So, and you know, having picked up some orchestration stuff over here, you know, you think of string parts if you're doing like pads and things like that. I'd always think of it in terms of 4 voices and never try to clutter up chords and open things up and, you know, do smooth moves. So, you know, a lot of, you know, all your voice leading stuff you learn here, all that kind of stuff, it all comes in handy. So you basically, no knowledge is wasted.
In your listening, going from classical to rock, did you sort of bypass the blues and early rock in the 60s?
Yeah, I didn't. I mean, did a little bit with jazz. I remember getting a book that was just showing how the scales work and would practice arpeggios and stuff, but I didn't really do a lot with jazz at all. So I kind of missed the blues jazz thing. So I was like solid rock and classical were my things, and you know, I combined really well with the TSO stuff since
Yes. If someone called you to play a blues gig, do you do that kind of thing?
I've never done one of those gigs, but it'd be fun.
No.
You know, I've been playing a little bit.
Yeah.
Like over the, you know, last 10, 20 years, you just have to
Sure.
do some. So I can do a basic blues and get through it, but like I don't know all the standards. I'm horrible at memorizing stuff. So I'm, you know, like come in and play all the standards. You know, I can relearn things and learn fairly quickly, but I just don't have that kind of repertoire where you go to a party and say, oh, sit down and play this. And it's like,
Right.
yeah, right.
Okay. But you memorized all the patch bass in the record playing.
No, I can do it. I never was in that world. I never. The only time I ever played in like cover bands was here with my band Rogue.
And what kind of material were you doing?
Oh, we did like every from like Secret Agent Man to we played the Cars. We played a lot of Steely Dan. You know, which does have jazz influences. So yeah, I mean, I can play an 11th chord. I know what things are,
Yeah.
but
Okay.
I just like the old jazz standards. I don't know at all.
Would you play frat parties and that kind of thing?
We played all the frat parties. Sometimes like 2 or 3 in a weekend.
Yeah.
And we did this senior year in the spring. They had used to have a thing called Commons Carnival, where the people who had Commons apartment, which used to be upstairs, right? Before they renovated everything, there used to be an apartment upstairs,
Okay.
and that was like the most sought after place to live on campus. So whoever got number 1 in the lottery would get Commons apartment, because it was a big 3-bedroom apartment with a huge living room, and you know, you're right in the middle of campus upstairs. And so they would do this big party. So we did. It was kind of like a Woodstock-esque thing. We're set up outside. You know, I had a big PA system. I was always the guy that owned the PA, so I was, you know, in the band. There's always one guy that owns the PA. That was me. So you know, you run around, set up stuff, and like hope you can remember how to play the songs by the time it's all up and working. So you know.
But at the end of the night, you get the
And you get to tear it all down at the end. Everybody else is like, you know, drunk and leaving, and you go, guys. But by that time, we had people that would help. But
yeah.
that was a great time. There's like all these old photographs, and like one guy cut together a U2. We made a cassette recording of the day, and it actually came out great. So that's still out there. You see it on YouTube, and it's got like just pictures. And it looked like there's one. It was all the trees, all the elms had died. So like the quad was wide open. It was like right outside us. South Dorm is where we were set up, and it was great. Just had a big stage set up, big voice of the theaters with JBLs.
It's really cool because I've interviewed a few Hamilton folks from the classes of the 50s, and they were doing the same thing, except they were playing Dixieland, they were playing upbeat jazz, but they were playing the frat parties. They would drive to Cornell, they'd play a couple frats, you know.
Oh yeah.
That's really neat to hear that.
Yeah, it was so much fun doing that, and yeah, different days.
Yeah. Do you remember why you chose Hamilton?
I remember coming here and like I actually got a ride with a friend of mine down here. He was going to look at Colgate, and my uncle had gone there, so I went to Colgate and then drove on to Hamilton, and just really liked it, and came back for an interview. I was a swimmer too. The swim coach liked me,
Okay.
and it appealed to me, and the application was really short. There was like one essay or something, and all the other ones you had to write a book for, and I hated writing. So
You hated writing. You came to Hamilton. It was writing intensive. Or maybe,
I know, and they passed me out of freshman writing because
wow.
my grammar was really good, but
Okay.
which in hindsight I wish they hadn't, because I would have really.
So you came here in '75.
Yes.
Do you remember what the tuition was?
Tuition was under $5,000, and we were in double-digit inflation during that time. So by the time I left, it was over $8,000. So in 4 years, it almost doubled, and now it's gone up a little bit since then.
A little bit.
Yeah, it's still the price of a nice car. Like a really nice car is 1 year of tuition. Is how you have to kind of look at it.
Would you consider having your kids come here?
If I wanted to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is really fascinating stuff for me. What do you envision yourself doing? Is this something you came here for a month?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sorry I didn't get to know you better before this month is up. But do you do this kind of thing more? Is this something that is on your radar?
Yeah, I always saw as kind of being college professor as like the ultimate kind of retirement job. It's got a great schedule.
Yes.
And just being able. And I've always loved teaching people, whether it's one-on-one or working with people. Taking interns and just show them how to make things work. And I've always come and done like one-off classes where I'll just come in and be the guest lecturer for the day. And so I've been doing that for a long time. And the last time I did that, last year I came up for one of Sam's classes. And I've known Sam. We were talking. It turns out I was one of the kids that got hired to help move Sam in. So I knew I met him like when he had first got here, but I didn't remember how. But it was because I was carrying up the couch up the stairs with a couple other guys who were music majors, after I graduated. So it's like, and then I've been on the performing arts committee for years and years. So I got to know him well through there too. So I was saying, I'd love to do more of this. I really like the teaching, and he's getting ready to do a sabbatical, and he's been really busy with theater art complex. So he said, why don't you at first it was like, maybe you can take over for me when I leave, and then figured out this in-between thing where I'm just taking one of his sections of topics in music. So it just worked out fine. I could teach for a month and doing topics in music, and I'm just teaching like music in the commercial world, kind of giving them an idea how things work, with unions and performing rights organizations, and basics of how recording works, how you talk to recording engineers, because if you're working in music, you got to deal with all this stuff at some point, at some level. So just kind of did a broad overview of that, and then doing a songwriting workshop as well. So it's been wonderful for me.
It's terrific that these students are getting the real deal from someone who's done it. Because sometimes in music schools, the professors are sort of twice removed from the real world. At least that's been my observation. It's not that they're not good musicians, but they may not have experienced the real thing for any length of time.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm glad I got to do this.
Yeah.
In fact, I have I can pick your brain on this. I have a couple of students now who they wanted to go into music, and they think they want to be in the recording end of things. And
Mm-hmm.
we had a brief. We briefly brought up this idea of going to school to be an engineer. Is that the way to go?
Not really.
Okay,
You
so
can do it. Like the degree is sometimes more important when you're going to another institution, but you're gonna, pay a fortune to basically come out and not be making money. You'll still be at the bottom. You'll know more. For me, it makes sense to take maybe a short course or something like that. I remember when I first went to New York, I was looking at one of the recording schools, and it was like 2-year program. It was at that time it was gonna cost like $20-something thousand, and then I saw they had like a 3-month course at the new school, for $300. where they just introduce you stuff. You got to see inside of a studio, get to touch a few mics, but most of it was from reading all the recording magazines, reading every book I could find on recording, seeing how all that works, and then I got my unpaid job at Record Plant and used that as my school and learned how to do stuff like that and worked up through there. I mean, you can, some people do get a lot out of the recording schools, but it's not a direct route. You still have to be persistent as hell, and you still have to work really hard, you know, and with some of them cost now, you could buy your own recording setup and put it together and, like, you know, learn Pro Tools, do all this stuff, and there's different ways to do it, but there's like no magic bullet, you know. Full Sail, they have great facilities and stuff like that. I have actually hired a guy from Full Sail who's currently working for me as an engineer, but he's like him, like a friend of his, and maybe one other person actually have jobs coming out of there. So it's not necessarily the best way to go. You know, some people it's great for, but there's no guarantee of what you're going to end up with in the job. There's, what's his name? There's one school out in Vancouver where they really teach you like old school how to engineer. It's, I'm spacing on the name. Bob Ezrin and, you know, who produced The Wall and tons of other stuff, you know. All-time great producer. He runs it with Garth Richards, and those guys have a pretty intense school where they there's like a whole thing how to.
Well, you still have to go to a major New York or Nashville, or you have to be where it's happening, don't you?
It helps. I mean, there are small pockets everywhere, but in New York, there's just such a huge pool of talent. You can. And there still are some, like all the major studios are shutting down. There's very few left in New York. It's just because everybody's doing it at home, you know. So there are not as many opportunities for people to, you know, find a job in the industry. You know, there's still a lot of film mixing. There's, you know, mixing for television. There's all that kind of stuff as far as the engineering goes. But a lot of it is you just have to get out there and invent yourself. And, you know, one of the exercises is like, set yourself a goal, write 5 steps to get there. It could change tomorrow, but you have to aim somewhere. You can't go, oh, I don't want to go, I don't know where I'm going. You have to say, all right, like for me it was like, I want to work at I want to get a job at Record Plant. That was my goal. I did that, and then that's what I want to try this. And then one guy, I can't remember his name, but the description of, you know, it's like you get windows of opportunity will open for you at various times, and they just open for a second, and you have to be ready to go through. You know, it could be a door, it could be a window. You can use whatever analogy you want, but they open, and they're there. But you have to be able to recognize it, and be prepared to go through it at the time. So you need to have your chops up in every aspect, and be ready to go. And it's not a normal 9-to-5 life. You don't go, oh, sorry, I gotta go. You know, they'll get interns who say, no, you know, I gotta leave. I'm supposed to have dinner, and it's like, okay, you're not gonna be doing this. You know, that doesn't exist. If you want to do it for, you know, the real music side, that is more you're working for a TV station, and moving one fader up and down at a time.
I'm the 9-to-5 guy, and I'm the 5 to. But fascinating for me. Thank you very much.
Oh, my pleasure. My
Do
pleasure.
you have any last, have a rock band anecdote that you could share with us?
Oh,
You know.
this is what, I told. Oh, things happen on stage. Like, a couple things. One, I had a spinning keyboard rig. Basically made up, I could spin the whole thing around, and I rigged up pedals that's moved with it so I could play and move around in circles and figured out how to do that. And one time I spun it and it just went wobble, 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 bam, right over. It was in the middle of Christmas Eve Sarajevo. They got it up and plugged back in, working in a few minutes, but it was just like, whoa, that went over. That was kind of funny. And then the other thing was, very first time I played Madison Square Garden, have a song called Wizards in Winter, which is one of the ones I co-wrote. It goes bop, 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 bop. And it starts off with a string patch in the right hand and piano on the other side on the lower keyboard. And we have this song called Prince of Peace, which is just solo piano and singer. And it was originally in the key of A, and had to drop it down to F for the current singer that was singing it. And instead of relearning it, I just used the transpose button on the keyboard. And like last minute at the end of soundcheck, he goes, "Oh, can we run through that once?" Because everybody's nervous. It's the Madison Square Garden, and so I said sure. So I transposed it, played it, and he goes, "Okay, that's all good." Forgot to transpose it back. So and my keyboard tech didn't catch that either. So very first opening notes in Madison Square Garden is when, what? I was like, what? And I kept playing it. It's like, because it was a major third apart. So, it was, it's what rock guys call jazz, So that was really special. It took me like a few seconds to figure that out. But it was like, it's the loudest thing in the mix, just boom, totally wrong. So.
That's some polytonality going on.
Yeah, major polytonality, yeah. Yeah, it was like, I remember Sam Pellman came to a show in Syracuse once, and he goes, so this is going to be mostly tonal stuff, right, that I'm going to be hearing? And I go, well, there's random bursts of atonality, but yeah, it's mostly tonal. So, that stuff.
Well, thank you. It's been really very interesting.
Oh, my pleasure.